The observation deck of Outpost Sentinel stretched before Captain Emily Harper like a cathedral of isolation. Massive transparent aluminum windows revealed the infinite blackness of deep space, punctuated by distant starlight that seemed to mock the station's precarious existence. Outside, the quantum positioning systems tracked an approach that sent shivers through every communication channel in known space. The Kralek Warbringer was coming. Emily's fingers danced across the holographic interface, pulling up centuries of archival records. Most commanders would have been paralyzed by fear, but she saw something different. Where others witnessed certain destruction, she perceived a complex puzzle waiting to be solved. Her personnel file told a story of persistent outsider status. Academy records showed a trail of brilliant strategies that defied conventional military thinking. Recommendations for advanced tactical command had been repeatedly blocked, her unconventional approaches viewed with suspicion by more traditional leadership. Now, those same leaders had abandoned her and the outpost to what everyone considered an inevitable fate. The Kralek Warbringer wasn't just a ship or a commander. It was a legend that had reduced entire civilizations to cosmic dust. 17 documented conflicts, 0 defeats, a record so perfect it bordered on statistical impossibility. Every species that had faced the Warbringer had been systematically dismantled, their entire cultural and technological infrastructure erased within standard galactic weeks. Humanity was next on the list. Communication logs flickered across her secondary display. Diplomatic channels were a cacophony of panic and resignation. The Interstellar Coalition's Emergency Council had already begun evacuation protocols. They had effectively written off Outpost Sentinel and the 3,000 personnel stationed there as an acceptable loss. Emily knew better. She pulled up the most recent deep scan analysis of the approaching vessel. Its configuration defied standard ship designs. Quantum-locked armor plating, gravimetric weapon systems that could literally crush matter at the molecular level, computational networks that could process tactical scenarios faster than most species could blink. Most commanders would have surrendered. Most would have initiated final protocol and prepared for a clean, quick extinction. Emily Harper was not most commanders. A soft alert pinged from her communication console. Chief Engineer Marcus Rodriguez approached, his weathered face a map of concern and determination. They had served together for 7 years, long enough that words were often unnecessary. "Status report?" Emily asked, not taking her eyes off the approaching threat. Marcus's voice was steady. "Primary defensive systems are at 62% operational capacity. We've managed to reroute emergency power through some creative engineering. But it's not enough," Emily finished for him. A ghost of a smile crossed Marcus's face. "When has that ever stopped us before?" The question hung in the air, pregnant with possibility. Their shared history was a testament to impossible victories. The Mars reconstruction, the Europa conflict, the Proxima engagement. Each time, they had been told something was impossible. Each time, they had found a way. Emily's mind was already racing, connecting seemingly unrelated systems. The station wasn't just a military installation. It was a complex organism waiting to be transformed. Every industrial fabricator, every life support module, every agricultural system, they were all potential weapons waiting to be reimagined. The main display updated, showing the Kralek Warbringer's precise approach vector. Most would see cold, mathematical precision. Emily saw patterns, predictability, weakness. "Marcus," she said suddenly, "start preparing the hydroponics section. I want full system access and complete reconfiguration capabilities." The engineer raised an eyebrow. "Hydroponics?" Against that, Emily's smile was something between a predator's grin and a mathematician's excitement. Especially against that. Outside the window, the star field seemed to shift. The Kralek Warbringer was close now. Close enough that most species would already be preparing their final transmissions. Preparing to become another footnote in the legendary warrior's unbroken record of conquest. But Emily Harper was preparing for something else entirely. First contact was moments away. and humanity was about to show the galaxy what it meant to stand against the impossible. The station's engineering core hummed with an electricity that had nothing to do with its power systems. Chief Engineer Marcus Rodriguez moved between holographic interfaces, his hands a blur of motion as he executed Captain Harper's seemingly impossible orders. Hydroponics wasn't just a food production system anymore. It was becoming a weapon. Emily stood beside him, her mind racing through potential configurations faster than the station's quantum processors. Abandoned agricultural research, forgotten experimental protocols, and cutting-edge modular design principles crashed together in her imagination. "We're talking about repurposing entire life support systems," Marcus muttered, pulling up schematics that would have made traditional military strategists weep. "The computational complexity alone is exactly why they won't see it coming," Emily finished. The station's primary mission had been agricultural research and deep space food production. Hundreds of specialized chambers designed to grow experimental crops in zero-gravity environments now represented something entirely different. Each hydroponics module contained intricate environmental control systems, precise chemical delivery mechanisms, and advanced filtration networks. Most would see plants. Emily saw distributed computational networks, adaptive chemical warfare platforms, mobile sensor arrays that could reshape themselves faster than any traditional scanning system. Marcus pulled up a diagnostic overlay. The nutrient delivery systems can be reconfigured as precision chemical dispersal networks. Each growth chamber becomes an independent computational node. His fingers danced across the interface, revealing layers of potential that most engineers would never perceive. Maintenance robots received new protocols. Industrial fabricators were stripped down and rebuilt with combat subroutines. Even the station's waste reclamation systems became potential defensive mechanisms. "We're turning a research station into a combat organism," Marcus said, a mix of professional excitement and genuine disbelief in his voice. Emily's eyes never left the tactical display. The Kralek Warbringer was close now. Close enough that traditional defensive systems would have already surrendered. But traditional was a word that meant nothing to her. "Every system is a weapon," she muttered. "Every module a potential defensive position." The station's core computer system received a series of patches that would have violated every standard military protocol. Artificial intelligence constraints were removed. Experimental learning algorithms were activated. The entire station was about to become something more than a simple installation. Marcus whistled softly. The Ethics Review Board would have a complete meltdown if they could see this. "Good thing they're not here," Emily responded. Quantum entanglement communication systems were rewired. Gravitational sensors became potential weapon targeting networks. The station's massive reactor, originally designed for sustainable agricultural research, could now pulse with enough electromagnetic energy to scramble entire ship systems. 62% of the hydroponics chambers can be converted to active defense platforms, Marcus reported. Chemical composition can be dynamically altered. We can create localized environments that would be catastrophic to non-human biological systems. Emily nodded. The Kralek relied on specific environmental conditions. Their technology assumed predictable defensive responses. They would find neither here. Specialized growth chambers that once nurtured rare plant species from a dozen different planetary ecosystems now became potential computational battlegrounds. Genetic modification research that had been shelved for decades suddenly found new, unexpected purpose. "We're not just defending," Emily said quietly. "We're rewriting the entire concept of defensive strategy." The station's structural integrity fields began to shift. Modular design elements that had been intended for easy maintenance now became a dynamic defensive network. Corridors could reshape. Defensive positions could emerge and vanish faster than any targeting system could track. Marcus looked up, a rare smile crossing his face. They're not going to know what hit them. Outside, the star field began to shift. The Kralek Warbringer's approach was no longer a distant threat. It was an imminent reality. But Outpost Sentinel was no longer just a research station. It was becoming a living, breathing combat organism. a testament to human innovation, a nightmare waiting to be unleashed. First contact was moments away, and humanity was about to show the galaxy what true adaptation looked like. The communication center of Outpost Sentinel had transformed into a neural network of calculated deception. Captain Emily Harper stood before a constellation of holographic displays, each one a carefully crafted weapon of psychological warfare. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the station's lead xenolinguist, watched with a mixture of fascination and professional admiration. Her life's work had been understanding the intricate communication patterns of alien civilizations. Now she was about to see her research weaponized in ways she had never imagined. The Kralik communication protocols are more than a language, Elena explained, her fingers dancing across a complex linguistic matrix. They're a cultural DNA. Every transmission carries layers of hierarchical information: status, intent, historical context. Emily's eyes never left the primary display. And we're going to use that against them. The first phase of their psychological assault was already in motion. Carefully constructed communication bursts began to flood the incoming Kralik communication bands. Each transmission was a precision-crafted puzzle designed to create maximum confusion. Some messages contradicted each other. Others presented impossible defensive configurations. Tactical reports suggested capabilities that shifted with each transmission. The Kralik would receive a communication landscape that defied logical interpretation. "We're exploiting their cognitive rigidity," Elena said, pulling up comparative linguistic analysis. The Kralik warrior culture is built on absolute certainty. Their entire military doctrine depends on perfect information. Marcus joined them, bringing up additional system diagnostics. "We're giving them anything but certainty." Holographic projections began to dance across the communication interfaces. Fabricated sensor readings suggested multiple defensive platforms. Phantom weapon signatures flickered in and out of existence. Each transmission was a psychological jab, designed to create doubt and hesitation. "Their AI processing systems will be going crazy," Elena muttered. "They'll be trying to reconcile impossible data sets." Emily allowed herself a small smile. Exactly. The communication assault went beyond simple misinformation. Each transmission was a carefully constructed linguistic trap. Human xenolinguists had spent decades studying Kralik communication patterns. Every word, every quantum-encoded signal carried multiple layers of meaning. Historical records showed the Kralik's previous conquests: 17 documented conflicts, 0 defeats, but those victories had always been built on absolute predictability. They approached each conflict with a level of certainty that bordered on cultural arrogance. Humanity was about to introduce them to uncertainty. Encrypted messages began to contradict each other at fundamental levels. Defensive system reports suggested impossible configurations. Tactical networks presented shifting capabilities that defied standard military logic. "We're not just confusing them," Elena explained. "We're attacking their fundamental understanding of warfare." The Kralik relied on precise computational models. Their entire military strategy depended on perfectly predictable responses. They would find nothing predictable here. Marcus pulled up a secondary display showing the incoming vessel's approach vector. "They're starting to slow down. Our communications are forcing their tactical systems to constantly recalculate." Every transmission was a weapon. Every signal a potential psychological blow. Outpost Sentinel wasn't just preparing a defense. It was launching a full-scale assault on the Kralik's most fundamental understanding of conflict. Elena's linguistic algorithms worked in concert with the station's communication systems. Each burst of information was a carefully tuned instrument, designed to create maximum cognitive dissonance. The Kralik would receive a communication landscape that defied all previous understanding. "They'll be fighting ghosts," Emily said quietly. The first wave of psychological warfare was just beginning, and humanity was about to show the galaxy that the most dangerous weapon was not a gun or a missile, but pure, unbridled human creativity. Outside, the star field continued to shift. The Kralik Warbringer approached, growing larger with each passing moment. But for the first time in its legendary history, the unstoppable force was about to encounter something it had never seen before. True, unpredictable human innovation. The first wave of Krallic assault pods breached the outer perimeter with surgical precision. Designed for instantaneous planetary invasion, they moved with a mechanical perfection that had crushed countless civilizations. They found something entirely unexpected. Outpost Sentinel was not a traditional defensive installation. It was a living, breathing organism of technological chaos. Lieutenant Sarah Chen monitored the initial invasion from the secondary control room. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, but her eyes betrayed a hint of something else. Excitement. Anticipation. The first assault team materialized in what should have been a standard corridor. Instead, they found themselves in a space that defied fundamental physical laws. Gravity fluctuated. Walls seemed to breathe. Environmental systems shifted with impossible complexity. Corridor reconfiguration in progress. Marcus's voice came through the communication system. Adaptive molecular restructuring at 78% efficiency. Emily watched the tactical display with predatory focus. Each Krallic invasion pod represented decades of perfected invasion technology. Quantum-locked armor. Adaptive combat systems. Neural-linked combat units that moved with impossible synchronization. They would find none of their expected advantages here. The first team of Krallic warriors discovered that movement itself had become a weapon. Corridors twisted. Gravity fields fluctuated. What appeared to be a straight path would suddenly curve, redirect, or simply cease to exist. Maintenance robots, repurposed from their original functions, became mobile defensive platforms. Industrial fabricators transformed into precision targeting systems. Even the station's waste reclamation networks became potential killing zones. "They're trying to establish a beachhead," Sarah reported, her voice clinical and precise. "Traditional invasion protocols are failing." Emily knew the statistics. The Krallic had never failed an invasion. 17 documented conflicts. 0 defeats. Their neural-linked combat units could typically adapt to any defensive strategy within standard galactic minutes. They were about to meet their first true challenge. The first Krallic squad found themselves in a corridor that simply didn't exist moments before. Holographic camouflage systems merged with molecular restructuring to create defensive spaces that defied traditional understanding. "Hydroponics chambers are now active defensive zones," Marcus reported. "Chemical composition can be altered in microseconds. We can create localized environments catastrophic to their biological systems." Specialized growth chambers that once nurtured rare plant species now became computational battlegrounds. Genetic modification research found unexpected purpose. The Krallic relied on perfect information, predictable defensive responses. They would find neither here. Assault pods began to lose cohesion. Communication systems became unreliable. What should have been a straightforward invasion dissolved into chaos. "They're experiencing complete systems breakdown," Sarah said, a note of professional admiration in her voice. Emily watched the tactical display. Each Krallic invasion point became a complex puzzle. Corridors that existed one moment would vanish the next. Defensive positions emerged and vanished faster than any targeting system could track. The station's structural integrity fields had become a dynamic combat network. What appeared to be a simple research installation revealed itself as something far more dangerous. "We're not just defending," Emily muttered. "We're rewriting the entire concept of invasion." Krallic warriors found themselves trapped in environmental zones that shifted molecular composition faster than their adaptive systems could respond. Maintenance robots became precision targeting platforms. Industrial systems transformed into weapons of unprecedented complexity. Outside, the massive Krallic Warbringer continued its approach. But its initial assault teams were discovering a fundamental truth about humanity. We do not fight. We adapt. The first wave of invasion was failing, and humanity was just getting started. Frustration became a tangible force within the Krallic command structure. Their legendary warrior culture had never encountered a scenario that defied their fundamental understanding of conflict. The massive holographic display on the Warbringer's primary command deck flickered with impossible data streams. Where there should have been precise tactical information, there was only chaos. Commander Vexnak, the most decorated military leader in Kralek history, felt something unprecedented: uncertainty. His neural-linked combat systems struggled to process the station's impossible defensive configurations. Every tactical algorithm, every battle simulation, every piece of accumulated military knowledge failed to provide a coherent response. Outpost Sentinel was not just defending. It was actively dismantling the Kralek's entire concept of warfare. Tactical systems are experiencing complete computational breakdown, his primary tactical officer reported. The words carried a tone that bordered on fear, an emotion rarely experienced in Kralek military culture. Emily Harper had turned the entire station into a living, breathing psychological weapon. Communication channels between Kralek invasion teams became increasingly fragmented. What should have been perfectly synchronized combat units dissolved into isolated pockets of confusion. Invasion pods found themselves redirected through impossible spatial configurations. The hydroponics research that had once focused on experimental crop growth now created localized environments that actively resisted Kralek biology. Chemical compositions shifted faster than their adaptive systems could compensate. Maintenance robots moved with a level of unpredictability that defied all known combat protocols. They're fighting a battlefield that doesn't exist, Sarah Chen observed from the station's secondary control room. Her fingers danced across holographic interfaces, each movement another layer of tactical complexity. Marcus Rodriguez stood beside her, a satisfied smile playing across his features. We're not just defending. We're fundamentally challenging their entire understanding of conflict. Vexnak reviewed historical records: 17 documented conflicts, 0 defeats. Each previous invasion had followed a precise, mathematically perfect strategy. Civilizations had been dismantled with surgical precision. Resistance had always been futile. Not today. The Kralek warrior culture was built on absolute certainty. Their entire military doctrine depended on perfect, predictable information. They approached each conflict with a level of confidence that bordered on cultural arrogance. Humanity was systematically dismantling that confidence. Invasion teams found themselves in environmental zones that actively resisted their presence. Corridors twisted through impossible geometric configurations. Defensive systems emerged and vanished faster than any targeting mechanism could track. We're seeing complete breakdown of their neural-linked combat coordination, Sarah reported. Her voice carried a clinical precision that barely masked her professional excitement. Emily watched the tactical display with predatory focus. Each disrupted Kralek system was another blow to their cultural understanding of warfare. They had never encountered an enemy that didn't follow expected patterns. The station's industrial fabrication systems became precision targeting platforms. Maintenance robots transformed into mobile defensive units. Even waste reclamation networks became potential killing zones. Vexnak's primary tactical officer reported increasing system failures. Invasion pods lost synchronization. Communication networks became unreliable. What should have been a straightforward conquest dissolved into absolute chaos. We are experiencing unprecedented tactical challenges, the officer reported, the words heavy with an emotion close to shame. Within the Kralek command structure, something unprecedented began to happen. Doubt, uncertainty, concepts that had never existed in their military culture were now flooding their computational systems. Emily understood something fundamental about conflict that the Kralek had never comprehended. War was not about overwhelming force. It was about adaptation, about turning the unexpected into a weapon. The massive Warbringer continued its approach, but its initial invasion strategy had been completely dismantled. Humanity was rewriting the rules of conflict, and they were just getting started. Outside, the starfield continued its silent vigil. The greatest warrior culture in galactic history was about to learn a fundamental truth. Some enemies don't just resist. some enemies fundamentally changed the nature of the conflict itself. The communication channel opened with a burst of quantum-encrypted energy. Commander Vexnak's holographic projection materialized in the station's primary communication chamber, a space that seemed to shift and breathe around him. Captain Emily Harper stood perfectly still. Their first direct communication would become a battle unlike any in galactic history. Vexnak's form was a study in biological perfection. Razor-sharp exoskeletal structures, neural implants that pulsed with computational energy. Centuries of genetic optimization created a warrior that was part organic, part machine. Every movement calculated. Every gesture a testament to a culture of absolute military precision. Emily represented something entirely different. Captain Emily Harper of Outpost Sentinel. Vexnak's translation matrix produced words that carried the weight of centuries of unbroken conquest. Prepare for formal surrender protocols. A smile played across Emily's lips, the first indication that nothing would go according to the Kralek's expectations. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the station's lead senolinguist, monitored every microsecond of the communication. Her fingers moved across quantum linguistic interfaces, analyzing each word, each subtle communication nuance. He's using third-level hierarchical communication patterns, she whispered to Marcus, designed to establish immediate dominance. Marcus watched the tactical displays. They're about to learn that doesn't work with humans. Emily's response came coated in layers of linguistic complexity that would take Kralek computational systems milliseconds to fully process. Each word was a weapon. Each sentence a strategic maneuver. Commander Vexnak, she began, your approach suggests a fundamental misunderstanding of our situation. The holographic space around them began to shift. Computational projections danced at the edges of perception. What should have been a straightforward communication became a multi-dimensional chess match. Vexnak's neural implants worked overtime. Communication protocols that had dismantled 17 different civilizations began to experience cascading computational challenges. Your defensive capabilities are irrelevant, Vexnak responded. The words carried absolute certainty. 17 conflicts, 0 defeats. Emily's smile grew wider. Let's discuss statistical probability, she said. Her words became a linguistic algorithm that would challenge the very foundation of Kralek military thinking. Elena watched in professional fascination. This was more than a confrontation. It was a fundamental assault on an entire culture's understanding of conflict. The holographic space became a battleground of information. Quantum encrypted messages danced between them. Each transmission carried multiple layers of meaning. Tactical information, psychological warfare, cultural challenge. Vexnak experienced something unprecedented. Doubt. You cannot comprehend the mathematical precision of our conquest, he stated, but the absolute certainty in his voice had developed a subtle tremor. Emily understood something fundamental about conflict that the Kralek had never learned. War was not about overwhelming force. It was about turning the unexpected into a weapon. 17 conflicts. She repeated his own words back to him. 0 defeats. An interesting statistical anomaly. Her linguistic algorithms began to deconstruct the Kralek's communication protocols. Each word a precision strike against their computational systems. Marcus monitored the tactical displays. The station's defensive systems responded to every nuance of the communication. Corridors shifted. Environmental systems prepared complex defensive configurations. He's trying to establish dominance through communication hierarchy, Elena muttered. Classic Kralek diplomatic approach. Emily was already 10 steps ahead. The communication became a multi-dimensional assault. Tactical information, psychological warfare, cultural challenge. Each transmission carried layers of meaning that would take their computational systems milliseconds to fully process. Vexnak's neural implants began to experience unprecedented computational stress. For the first time in the Kralek's documented history, a potential target was fighting back in a way that defied all established understanding of conflict. The personal confrontation was just beginning. and humanity was about to show the galaxy that true strength was never about pure force. It was about the ability to fundamentally change the nature of the conflict itself. The station's reactor core began to pulse with an energy that defied standard physical understanding. Captain Emily Harper watched as the final stages of her most audacious plan came to life. Marcus Rodriguez moved between quantum control interfaces, his hands a blur of motion. "Reactor modulation is reaching critical transformation point," he reported. The words carried a mix of professional precision and barely contained excitement. Outpost Sentinel was no longer just a defensive installation. It was becoming a weapon of unprecedented complexity. The Krallic Warbringer's computational systems struggled to process the impossible data streams. Invasion teams found themselves trapped in environmental zones that shifted faster than their adaptive technologies could compensate. What should have been a straightforward military operation dissolved into complete chaos. Commander Vexnak's primary tactical display showed a battlefield that made no logical sense. "Reactor is converting primary energy systems," Sarah Chen announced from her control station. "We're seeing complete molecular restructuring of defensive platforms." Emily understood something fundamental about conflict that the Krallic had never comprehended. Warfare was not about overwhelming force. It was about turning the unexpected into a weapon. The station's hydroponics research had been more than simple agricultural development. Each growth chamber became a complex computational node. Genetic modification research found its most unexpected purpose. Chemical composition systems could alter localized environments in microseconds. Maintenance robots transformed into precision targeting platforms. Industrial fabrication systems became mobile defensive units. Even waste reclamation networks became potential killing zones. Vexnak watched in growing horror as his invasion strategy completely disintegrated. Primary defensive systems are experiencing complete molecular reconfiguration, his tactical officer reported. The words carried a tone that bordered on fear, an emotion rarely experienced in Krallic military culture. Emily had turned the entire station into a living, breathing technological organism. Reactor energy began to pulse in patterns that defied standard physical understanding. Quantum entanglement communication systems created defensive networks that could reshape themselves faster than any targeting mechanism could track. "We're seeing complete breakdown of their neural-linked combat coordination," Sarah reported. The Krallic had approached the conflict with absolute certainty. 17 documented invasions, 0 defeats. Their entire military doctrine depended on perfect, predictable information. Humanity was about to show them the true meaning of unpredictability. Reactor systems began to pulse with an energy that went beyond traditional weapon configurations. Molecular restructuring reached levels that challenged fundamental understanding of physical systems. Marcus watched the tactical displays with a predatory focus. "Reactor is now functioning as a distributed computational network," he reported. "We're creating defensive capabilities that don't just resist. They actively transform." Emily knew the statistical improbability of their success. A single research station against the most successful invasion force in galactic history. The odds were mathematically impossible. Mathematically impossible had never stopped humanity before. The Krallic's invasion pods found themselves trapped in environmental zones that actively resisted their presence. Corridors twisted through impossible geometric configurations. Defensive systems emerged and vanished faster than any targeting mechanism could track. "Complete systems failure in multiple invasion sectors," Sarah announced. Commander Vexnak experienced something unprecedented. Uncertainty, doubt, concepts that had never existed in their military culture now flooded their computational systems. The massive Warbringer continued its approach, but its invasion strategy had been completely dismantled. Reactor energy pulsed with a complexity that went beyond traditional weapon systems. Each molecular transformation created defensive capabilities that rewrote the fundamental understanding of conflict. Emily watched the tactical display. Each disrupted Krallic system was another blow to their cultural understanding of warfare. They had never encountered an enemy that didn't follow expected patterns. The turning point had arrived. Humanity was about to show the galaxy that true strength was never about pure force. It was about the ability to fundamentally change the nature of the conflict itself. Outside, the starfield continued its silent vigil. The greatest warrior culture in galactic history was about to learn a fundamental truth. Some enemies don't just resist. Some enemies fundamentally rewrite the rules of existence. The final moments of conflict arrived with a silence more deafening than any explosion. Commander Vexnak watched in total incomprehension as the Krallic Warbringer's systems began to systematically shut down. What had begun as an inevitable conquest had transformed into something beyond military understanding. Outpost Sentinel was no longer a defensive installation. It had become a living weapon of unprecedented complexity. Captain Emily Harper stood at the center of the station's primary control chamber. Her team, Marcus Rodriguez, Sarah Chen, and Dr. Elena Rodriguez, moved with a synchronized precision that defied traditional military training. Primary computational networks are now completely decoupled, Marcus reported. His voice carried a mixture of professional calm and barely contained excitement. The station's reactor pulsed with an energy that seemed to challenge fundamental laws of physics. Molecular restructuring reached levels that would rewrite scientific understanding for generations to come. "They're experiencing complete systems breakdown," Sarah announced. Outside, the massive Warbringer began to drift. Its legendary neural-linked combat systems dissolved into computational chaos. 17 documented conflicts. 0 defeats. The perfect record was about to be shattered. Emily understood something fundamental about conflict that the Krallic had never learned. Warfare was not about overwhelming force. It was about turning the unexpected into a weapon. Communication channels erupted with cascading system failures. Invasion pods became isolated pockets of confusion. What should have been a perfectly synchronized military operation dissolved into absolute chaos. Tactical systems are experiencing irreversible computational collapse, Elena reported, her linguistic analysis revealing layers of communication breakdown. Commander Vexnak experienced something unprecedented. Defeat. The holographic displays showed the impossible. A single research station had not just defended itself. It had systematically dismantled the most successful invasion force in galactic history. Emily's strategy had transformed every system into a potential weapon. Hydroponics chambers became computational battlegrounds. Maintenance robots became precision targeting platforms. Industrial fabrication systems became mobile defensive units. Complete neural link failure in multiple invasion sectors, Marcus reported. The Krallic warrior culture had approached the conflict with absolute certainty. Their entire military doctrine depended on perfect, predictable information. They would find neither here. Humanity was about to show the galaxy that true strength was never about pure force. It was about the ability to fundamentally change the nature of the conflict itself. The Warbringer's massive hull began to lose structural integrity, not through traditional weapon systems, but through a complete computational collapse that went beyond physical damage. "Reactor is maintaining full computational network," Sarah announced. "We're seeing complete molecular transformation of defensive capabilities." Emily watched the tactical display with a predatory focus. Each disrupted Krallic system was another blow to their cultural understanding of warfare. Commander Vexnak's final transmission was a study in absolute defeat. Computational systems that had dismantled 17 different civilizations now experienced total, irreversible failure. "Impossible," the transmission read, but the word carried no conviction. The star field outside seemed to pause, watching, witnessing. Humanity had just rewritten the fundamental understanding of conflict. "Warbringer is completely disabled," Marcus reported. The words carried the weight of historical significance. Emily's response was simple: not disabled, transformed. The station's reactor continued to pulse, a beacon of technological innovation that would change galactic understanding forever. 17 documented conflicts, 18 encounters. The first defeat. Outside, the silent expanse of space bore witness to a fundamental truth. Some enemies don't just resist. some enemies fundamentally rewrite the rules of existence. The Kralek Warbringer drifted, defeated not by overwhelming force, but by an intelligence that understood something far more profound. Adaptation was the truest form of strength. Humanity had just announced its arrival on the galactic stage, and nothing would ever be the same again.